Welcome and thank you for listening to By the Way, a contemporary art news podcast where I present stories to my co-host Ando that he has most likely not heard of yet. My name is Eric and I'm an artist and art professional up here in Stockholm.
And my name is Ando, and I am also an artist, a podcaster, and an unemployed Christmas elf down here in Copenhagen.
Oh, 11 more months until you get to put that costume back on.
It's horrible.
Anyways, let's talk about some art. Today we're going to be talking about being so Baroque that you've got no Monet.
Oh, the puns are afloat.
Yes, good. Let's get it started.
All right, hit me with it. Let's hear it.
All right. So, you would think after we took a little hiatus over the holidays, there'd be some really juicy art news that I'd be excited to present to you. Sadly, I just couldn't get excited about too many things this go around.
Well, the truth is the art world does shut down even at the top tiers for, almost a solid month, I'd say, around the holidays.
Yeah, because once you get done with art, Basel, Miami, it kind of, shuts down a bit. You're right. So
yeah, people are cooked. And you have your Christmas group show just to try to get some last numbers on the books. That's around the middle of December. And then it's fucking over until, about now, first couple of weeks in January.
Yeah. The only little art story that I kind of thought about was the Met has decided to charge for admission again, or maybe for the...
that's right, and everyone's meowing about that on Twitter.
Yeah, so, I started to think, should we talk about that? And I said, no, I don't care about that enough. And, I think we've talked about the Met a few times, so I noticed also in the first 6 episodes that we've done, we've only talked about museums and institutions. So I thought today we would talk about David Zwirner Gallery. Big German gallerist that's now grown to massive sizes. And this was in the news a day or two ago that he is now expanding to 7 locations, and he's going to open up a massive $50 million gallery in Manhattan designed by Renzo Piano.
That's affordable.
50 million?
Well, just anything by Renzo Piano is affordable.
Yeah, well, actually, it's pretty affordable for him because they said in the article, it's a New York Times article, that his gallery generates $500 million every year. What's in profit, I don't know, but...
that is insane. Can you... I can't see how you can sell that much art, but of course, it's not a question of how much art, it's a question of how much the art costs.
Yeah, I mean, if you take...
And services, probably services is a big part of that.
Yeah, and I don't know if that would also count with what he is getting through sales through museum shows, because a lot of, almost every one of his artists are shown in museums, and if...
Right, acquisitions, that sort of stuff.
Exactly. Or is this just generated through those, handful of galleries? So that space is going to open up in 2020. And for a very short time, he'll have 3 locations in Manhattan.
He's closing an old one in order to have the new one eventually.
Exactly, yeah. And then he is actually opening another one this spring, that's going to open up with Art Hong Kong, or Art Basel Hong Kong. So he'll have a space in Hong Kong as well. Which I just thought,
wild. It's
crazy. Pace Gallery also, which is a New York-based gallery, is opening up one in Hong Kong for the same reason, to be right there for its clients at Art Basel Hong Kong. So
there's a lot of people opening up in China and Hong Kong and Singapore and some of these wealthier, large Asian cities.
Mm-hmm. But then also at the same time, as you have these, few just giant galleries expanding, you have also galleries like Andrea Rosen that was in New York. She decided to go ahead and close and just focus on a few estates and essentially dead artists, because she found out she's making more money off of her dead artists and her living artists.
She didn't have to talk to some goddamn artist anyways. Just they shut up for good, and then you can just sell it and have no meddling.
Well, also it's the brick and mortar cost, of actually having a space. I'm going to put a link to a book that I've actually talked to you about that's maybe the most boring, dry title ever, called The Global Art Gallery Report, by I think he's Swiss, a Swiss art researcher named Magnus Reich. that he puts out this book every year, and then he has another one that just kind of talks about the expenses and where money goes in the art world. And it's something ridiculous. It's like 60% of costs in a gallery is for their brick and mortar and just to keep the doors open. So,
yeah. I believe it. I totally believe it. People think gallerists just sit around and mint money, but there's a reason that 9 out of 10 do not make it, and that's probably closer to 99 out of 100 don't make it. It's so hard, and just like any unstable market job, you may sell a bunch 1 month and then nothing for 4 months.
Yeah, and that kind of segues to the next part that I was talking about. Is that's the big story that has happened in the last few years is through gentrification and rising rents is how many galleries have been closing, and not just in London, not just in New York, which are obvious places, but it's actually going and trickling down to the second and third tier cities. So, places like Dusseldorf or Kansas City. This effect of rising rents are affecting it's not just the New York galleries, the London, the Parises, but galleries in Copenhagen, Kansas City, Dusseldorf, ones that have less clients, less collectors. Those spaces are also closing, which then obviously trickles down to people like you and me who are artists. Where are we going to show? Where do we get our foot in the door?
Right, because you only show artwork which sells itself. Understood as artwork which has its established place in the market, and the sellers, if you have a relationship to them, will come. Then how's that going? Is it going to be nonprofit art spaces or state supported art spaces that are going to build careers, or where's the playing grounds before the big leagues?
Yeah, so that's really where I wanted to talk about with you today, is actually like new models for galleries, because that seems to be something that I keep having conversations with.
Interesting.
With people that are jaded from the art world, that have left art world positions as former directors, curators of galleries or museums, that are just they want to be involved. They can't afford to go to art fairs. They can't afford to open a brick and mortar gallery. They have the connections. They might even have a client list. So that's what I want to talk to you today, was about actually new models for art exhibitions. Any immediate response? Anything? Do you know of any new models? I have a list here, but
the whole idea about the art dealer versus the art gallerist, that we're leaning more into a little bit more of having a warehouse or having some sort of place to store the art, but not necessarily show it per se, or you don't have openings, you have a little showroom in a warehouse or something like that. The thing that actually popped to my mind first and foremost was the book Living and Sustaining a Creative Life by Sharon Loudon.
Yeah, you loaned me that book several months ago, and it's sitting next to my bed, uncracked, because, I'm the lazy donkey on this one.
Yeah, it's good. I recommend it to everybody because it's just honest stories from artists about how they, sustain and keep it alive.
I'll add a link to that in the show notes for anybody, so...
Do that, because Sharon's really sweet and it's really well made.
You know her personally?
I know her internet personally.
Yeah, we all know each other personally on the internet.
No, I reached out and just told her I really liked it, and I shouted it out on my podcast on the Undergang Armchair and stuff. So I enjoy it when artists talk realistically about the conditions that they work under, and the solutions they find, because everybody, you saw a wide breadth of solutions that people had found in order to sustain and survive. Yeah.
So that's kind of what, I'm also interested in as an artist, as well as somebody like on the art professional side, are these new ways of thinking, or even looking back at old things that have been done in the past, but we might have outgrown and maybe we should reintroduce. So, after doing quite a bit of, research on top of just what I've been hearing out in the art world, pop-up spaces obviously are something that people are going back to, that's been around for, decades. Collaborative spaces, sharing of spaces in other cities. That one is something that sounds super interesting. I read.
How does that work exactly?
Yeah, so there's a New York Times article that is from a few months ago that was really, really good. It's called Art Galleries Rethink Their Strategies as Art Fairs Proliferate. And in that, there is a conversation with these, I think it's 5 galleries in 5 different cities in North America that I think their general model is they've come to a mutual agreement to, let's say, have a stable of artists, let's just say 10. Each of those 5 will share get artists. So let's say you have one in LA, one in Denver, Kansas City, Chicago, and New York. 4 exhibitions a year will share artists from all 5 galleries. While then the other couple exhibitions a year will actually just show their own artists in their own spaces. So it's a way to disseminate the artists across the country in a way that they personally can't afford to take their artists to all these, let's say art fairs or even give them exhibitions or open doors for them there. And I think these other people that they're working with collaboratively don't see them as a threat because they're outside of their own market. But they see them.
That's interesting.
Yeah, so, somebody sitting in Kansas City who's running an excellent space doesn't have access to too many people in Los Angeles and vice versa.
Although it seems like it won't work with certain blue chip artists.
No, and that's where it's more this emerging artists or regional artists that are killing it, but...
Right, which could definitely be worth significant amounts of money.
Yeah, from the gallery standpoint, you're still talking about work that's selling potentially from $1,000 to $10,000. So that's a very interesting model. There's one called Condo that is kind of doing pop-up warehouse long-term exhibitions, and they've done one in New York, they've done one in London, and they're looking to do one I think next year in Shanghai, where it's kind of like, imagine like an institution, like a Kunsthal that just does a pop-up show with galleries and artists and giving them massive spaces. So sales isn't a massive, part of this. It's exposure into new markets.
It's not an art fair, though.
Not an art fair.
An exhibition.
Yeah. So the expenses are quite low because they're going into like old warehouses, non-traditional spaces. They're not paying a convention center. Then, there's one other model that I know. There was a New York space that was doing it that I had a friend who exhibited with them that I think has kind of gone defunct that was named Bang and Burn. And then you have somebody who's kind of taken that idea and gone much further, which is Nordic Stories here in Stockholm that's run by Kirsten Hinder, that she realizes that she doesn't want to pay for a brick and mortar, but she has access to artists that are here in Scandinavia, but she has connections in North America, so she's actually taking Scandinavian artists only to North America and taking essentially her product to the clients that she has.
Right.
And that's also another model that is becoming quite important. Is mid-sized galleries are just shutting down and saying, we don't need the gallery spaces. I'll just take my work to the clients instead of waiting for the clients to come to me.
Right. And that's basically a type of art consulting, right?
Yeah, it is, but
no,
it depends on...
It's an art dealer.
It's an art dealer because a consultant would typically just present work via like an iPad.
Right. They're a bridge from client to artist.
Yeah, this other model... is more about taking these artists to exhibit them or giving them exhibition opportunities or giving them opportunities to show in new venues and new cities, but in the areas where they know they have clients and people to sell to. What do you think of that as an artist? I have my own opinions on if I were to work with a person that was operating that way, but...
I think it's case contingent. If they're, I don't have any sort of like preconceived notions about where I should or shouldn't be as an artist. What I do have a preconceived notion about is that I need to have a certain amount of good feeling in the work, you know, in the collaboration I have with someone. So if somebody is working in that model and calling me a Scandinavian artist, which is debatable, I don't know, but and taking me to North America, then fine. I have no qualms about that. But if they're an asshole about it or shady, then it's a whole different thing.
Yeah.
You know, we were just talking earlier off mic about galleries and like how it is to work with galleries and what you expect and how much you should, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? What your own personal demands are. At what point is it not worth it for you? And you know, the whole thing, I don't know. I think in general the rule is take opportunities, even if they aren't perfect, but there is a limit.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of in that boat with you. The response that I've kind of got from a few artists with that kind of model is they want to exhibit the work. They want to have this idea of a white cube exhibition space and put this stuff together, you know, work on a series and put up 10 works and be able to invite their fans.
It's true that it's under the radar when you do it this way. There's no write-ups anywhere. There's no audience really. There's only potential purchasers.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
It's not in any way, shape, or form an engagement with the public, and that's true. That kind of sucks.
Yeah, and so that's the one hang-up that I've heard from, you know, a couple of artists is, you know, there's that desire to communicate directly and actually put together a cohesive show and not just a work or two works.
Right. It seems like a side thing to an exhibiting career.
Yeah.
It in no way can carry, you know, because it's true. You're going to make work in a vacuum. You're not going to be able to think larger. And I don't know. I call me naive. I still want to have an audience, which isn't necessarily an art buying audience, right? I mean,
yeah, you want the Joe Blow occasionally just to show up and, you know, grab a beer because it's your opening and give you random feedback on a photo that they have no clue anything about. And
and like apparently, you know, I sold a work in a little gallery show in December, and apparently the guy who bought it came off the street.
Yeah. I mean, it's always good to sell to homeless people.
He had known it was an art show.
Oh, you didn't mean off the street that way.
That speaks to the price point I live at. But no, he was coming for an art show, but he was not a client of the galleries.
Okay.
He had just kind of, let's not say wandered in, but he was unknown.
Yeah, so, you know, that's something I didn't think about is when you have a brick and mortar space that's open to the public in a, you know, somewhat convenient part of the city, of whatever city you're in, you are going to organically grow your audience for the gallery as well as for your artists.
Well, think about this. Let's say you were an art collector. Let's say you had a budget for buying art for, I don't know, let's just say $20,000 a year. And you actively use that every year. You would go to new places. You would be like, oh, hey, there's this gallery here I've never seen before. Why don't I just pop by and take a look?
Yeah.
And you may, in fact, develop a relationship with them or an artist or just, you know, fall in love with something there. And, hey, look, it's pretty affordable. So why not, you know?
You know, for us actually for you not knowing what we were going to talk about today, you've helped me segue so many times. Because my next little segue was actually to talk about, there's a guy who writes for Apollo Magazine, which is kind of an art-related magazine, who's a collector named Alain Servais, who is an art collector. I think he's Swiss. And he wrote a really good article on, you know, kind of this demise of the mid-sized gallery and, you know, these big galleries expanding, and blames a little bit of it on the galleries for not being able to manage their business, you know, overspending on the business side, if it's by going to fairs and just, you know, being stupid. But then the other part is he puts a lot of it on the collectors, is collectors not taking the risk on smaller galleries and more adventurous spaces. And we're talking probably, you know, collectors with more than a $20,000 a year budget.
Sure.
But that they're not, those are the ones that are maybe just going to the big galleries, going to the fairs, playing it safe, going with a, let's say, a Christopher Wool print instead of buying an emerging yet successful and somebody that will be sustaining artist from a...
Or not. Or not. I don't think that's a prerequisite.
Fair enough. Yeah. I would,
because the point is that you should take a chance, right? Which means it isn't secure.
Yeah. So, yeah. Okay. So fair enough. So they'll go by Christopher Wool print, which, is becoming a commodity. And he's a bad example. I'm just throwing out the name.
Never heard of him.
Oh, well, then good for you.
Just sharing my ignorance.
Yeah. No, that's fair enough. But, yeah, that they should be taking more risk and actually championing these spaces, because that's also the way that they can grow. Like you said, with this guy who came in and bought your photo in December, there's a guy off the street. Now the gallery is going to be able to build a relationship with them, slowly educate them over a couple year period. Potentially become one of the biggest clients for the gallery, maybe one of your biggest supporters.
You never know, that's for sure.
Yeah, and you wouldn't get that with some of these other kind of one-off pop-up spaces. I guess those are a little bit more for the art world, if I'm thinking about it now.
I think that's the problem, is that it's so network-based, which, of course, can be an incredible power to harness, but it takes out any sort of serendipity or kind of open doors for new engagement, or the whole thing about a lot of the art world is that most of the public access to the art world comes indirectly through wealthy people, either people who support museums, support collectors who support galleries, these sort of things, which create that when there's an opening at an art show, it's still always just open.
Yeah,
you can go. I go probably to 10 art shows a week, and most of them at this point I get a free drink in my hand. It's not even and that's underwritten by the people who have the money to pay them to keep the lights on.
Yeah, so somebody's subsidizing your drinking habit is essentially what you're saying.
Indeed, and this is why I moved to Europe. It's all about subsidizing habits.
No, to tie back into what we had first talked about with the Met actually admission prices going up, I looked, I did a little bit of research into that, came across some reports as well as some Swedish statistics on this, that the main reason that people don't go to museums is not because of the price. It's not that they're charging admission. The biggest thing that they found, and this was in 4 European cities and 1 American city, I think, it was time and lack of interest. So, having an open door at a brick and mortar place will occasionally draw in the random looky-loo, and help maybe build engagement that way slowly over time. But if you're doing these weird pop-up factory shows out in the middle of a warehouse district in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, what Joe Blow is going to drive their car out into the warehouse district to go look at some art? Again,
dude, no Joe Blow is even going to hear about
exactly. So, I think it was the High Museum in Atlanta. They're one of the few museums that have actually grown their audience diversity based on admission prices. It's because they started to change their programming for their audience instead of presenting the same old crap that all the other museums are doing. The
Monet shows?
Yeah, because they make a lot of Monet.
Sure.
Yeah, come on, laugh at my pun.
All right. I'll give you that one.
But yeah, they said that was the only way that that's one of the things that they've done, is they've built the diversity and brought in a lot larger audience.
Sure, which, oh my God, we could go on forever on this. There's also the whole idea about audience development.
You want to throw anything out, speak to it at all, or is that way too big?
Well,
of a
I don't really,
book?
except for my wife. She did, she worked in audience development at a museum in San Francisco, and her job was to bring in more audience. And she started with the let's get people who don't go to museums angle, and was gently pushed into the direction of, we want people who are your average museum's guests, just more of them.
Exactly.
So, you try to engage with children, minorities, people in certain social classes, people who didn't come from families who took them to museums. And they're all just kind of like, no, that's not really what we're looking for. And then she was just kind of like, well, what the fuck? I thought that's what I was supposed to do here. Like, that's the fun part, is trying to open this up for everybody.
Yeah, you don't want to actually educate and take the time. And I think even from a profit side, a commercial gallery, as a gallery gets older, their clients also get older with the gallery. So with a long established gallery that, been around for 20, 30 years, unless they intend to shut the doors when they retire, which is possible, they also need to educate and engage with a new audience, a younger audience, or just a different audience, because their clients, essentially their backers, are going to die as they die.
Yeah.
And that goes with museums, as art education gets pulled from a lot of American public schools more and more. You have a lot more people entering their 20s and 30s with maybe one course in art in high school and maybe something they were forced to take in college. Mm-hmm. And they don't know how to engage with art. They're very confused with anything that isn't just your big Monet show, the big blockbuster show. And so institutions and museums aren't going to take the risk either. And then that goes to the big collectors, that they're not educated well enough, and they're going to take the easy stuff also at an art fair. Yeah, so there's nobody out there to champion the small gallerist.
Well, there's people fighting for it, but it doesn't seem to be going the right direction, I guess.
So I would like, if anybody out there that's listening has any projects that they're working on that is outside the traditional gallery model, we'd love to know about that. And, or even if you're not working on it, but you know of one that you just think we'd be interested in, we'll add it to a list, that we'll have in the links on this episode, just as a resource, as well as education for our listeners that aren't even artists, but,
Good idea. Good idea. Yeah, let's get a little social media roll going here with some spaces. I can nominate the first one, which is Tint Art Space out in Julep, which is outside of Copenhagen, about an hour outside of Copenhagen. A couple of dudes just started a candy-colored art space. The only rules is that it's candy cane painted on the inside. And they have managed through sheer engagement and excitement to actually get funding for a year.
Oh, wow.
And put a town on the map, which was not on the map whatsoever. And not only that, the town has engaged with them as well and said, this is good for us. We want to support this. Very cool. So it's called Tegn, Tegn, which means draw in Danish. So let's put a link up to them because they're doing the good work out there. Yeah, I know of one or two up here in Stockholm, and if I put my mind to it, maybe I can think of one or two people, like a personal acquaintance like yours, that are in the U.S. so that we can give them a shout out. Hopefully, help them out a bit, but then. Yeah, again, listeners out there, if you know somebody, let us know. We'll check it out and hopefully give them a shout out as well. Shout out to Anas Revenlo. Should we wrap it up? Yeah, let's wrap it up. Before we wrap it up, I just want to point to, again, the fact that this program is hosted on the platform that we have built called Cultural Bandwidth. You can find it at culturalbandwidth.com. We have 2 podcasts at the moment. The other one is a show I host, which is discussions with artists about process and practice and everything. It's called The Undergang Armchair. And we just released the 111th episode. So there's a lot to grab onto there. So you can find all of that at culturalbandwidth.com. There's also more content on the way shortly. We have a third person involved. So, very soon we will have other sort of content. We're also open. So if you have an idea, if you want to have a podcast based around arts or creativity or something, shoot us a mail because we're looking to have more people in the stable here. Yeah, what we're trying to do here is just make a online platform for the arts. There is no podcast network out there that is just focused on the arts. So. Mm-hmm. And it's sound-based, but not necessarily. We are also open to writing or other bright ideas. We're not really going to limit it too much. No. Thanks for listening, guys. We appreciate your time.
please check us out on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. We have, cultural bandwidth for all of those, by the way. I've been pretty active on Facebook trying to, send out some news stories that are falling through the cracks between the weeks, as well as things that are just, little side notes, not enough to talk about here. And
if you're curious and engaged, Eric's got you covered on the Facebook page by the way.
I'm not that big on the old Instagram, and to be honest, I hate Twitter. So
yeah. I like both of those, so you can follow the Undergang Armchair on Instagram and Twitter.
Okay, there you go. In case you're biased like I am.
Exactly. Cool. Thanks, buddy.
All right.
Yeah, I'll see you next time.